Welcome, dear listeners, to another spine-tingling episode of our scary stories. I am your host, cloaked in shadows and drenched in the chilling echoes of the macabre. Tonight, as the moon hangs heavy in the Stygian canvas of the night, we invite you to step into the chilling labyrinth of our tale. Brace yourselves, for the shroud of normalcy is about to be ripped apart, revealing the gruesome dance of survival and monstrous transformations. The world outside might seem secure, but within the realm of our story, dread lurks in every corner. Sit back, clutch your blankets a little tighter, and let your imagination follow the eerie tune of our narrative. Remember, in this abyss of fear, you are not alone, for we are all fellow travelers in this chilling journey of our scary stories. The silence of the world is oppressive, stifling. It presses in on the four shambled walls of Dr. Adrian Holloway's lab, a decrepit structure hidden in the rotten heart of a long-dead city. The lab, once a beacon of scientific innovation, now stands as a solemn tombstone of a time before the Z-virus. Each creak of its rusted hinges, each flicker of the failing generator, is a lonely echo in the lifeless expanse. Dr. Adrian Holloway, a middle-aged man with lines of worry etched into his face, hunches over a desk cluttered with a jumble of Petri dishes, vials, and notebooks. His hands, coarse and stained from countless experiments, tremble slightly as they manipulate the tiny syringe. His narrowed eyes, the color of steel beneath the weight of insomnia, never leave the grotesque specimen laid out before him. A dismembered hand, pallid and chillingly still, a grim reminder of the world outside. A sharp, metallic scent permeates the air, mingling with the musty odor of decaying paper and the sterile tang of antiseptic. This is the aroma of Adrian's desperate battle against time and the virus, a fight waged amidst the eerie quietude. The silence is only broken by the occasional growl of the generator, or the mad scribbling of Adrian's pen against paper, both a desperate shout into the void. His radio, a grizzled relic from a bygone era, sits in the corner, casting long shadows in the dim light. Every evening, Adrian's voice spills into the static-choked airwaves, a lighthouse cutting through the fog of despair. A call for survivors, for signs of life, but all he hears is the lifeless hiss of static in return. It's a sobering reminder that he is possibly the last ember of sanity in a world swallowed by the undead. His mind keeps replaying the last day, the day before the desolation, when laughter and chatter were still part of his world. His wife's hazel eyes filled with warmth, his young son's laughter ringing through the halls. Now, all that's left are the echoes that haunt him, spurring him on in his solitary battle against an invisible enemy. Outside the lab, the city looms like a grotesque monument to human ambition. Skyscrapers, now skeletal structures with their glass eyes shattered, reach out to the leaden sky. Streets, once teeming with life, now lie deserted, except for the grotesque parodies of life that shuffle aimlessly. The smell of decay, both structural and human, hangs heavy in the air. Adrian watches this daily tableau from his small window, his heart heavy with the weight of his lonely crusade. His food rations, meager and tasteless, sit ignored on his desk. He tries not to remember the taste of fresh apples, the sizzle of cooking, the simple joy of a shared meal. The memories are too painful, a harsh reminder of all that he has lost and all that he fights for. Yet, in this desolate landscape, Dr. Adrian Holloway, the scientist, the survivor, the reluctant hero, soldiers on. For it's not just a cure he seeks, but redemption, a chance to right the wrongs of a world that slipped too fast, too far. He is haunted not by the monsters that lurk outside, but by the ones that fester within his memories. In the muted light of dawn, the city bore an ethereal glow, an illusion of tranquility marred by the rot and ruin that lay beneath. Dr. Adrian Holloway stood by the grimy window, his gaze sweeping over the once vibrant streets, now occupied by the grotesque undead, wandering aimlessly. His heart echoed with a silent beat of lament for what was in dread for what had become. His day began, as it always did, with a foray into the nightmare. Bundled in a makeshift suit of worn leather and patched denim, armed with nothing but a rusted pipe and his resolve, Adrian stepped outside the meager safety of his lab. The world greeted him with a chilling wind, a grim sonnet of reality carried on its breath. The crumbling city was a grotesque labyrinth, a puzzle of decay and desolation. Each excursion was a roll of the dice, a dance with death itself. The clatter of loose concrete beneath his worn boots echoed in the silence, a stark contrast to the dreadful quiet that the undead brought with them. He navigated the city with practiced caution, a predator amidst the haunted playground of the apocalypse. The supermarket, once abuzz with life, stood silent and desolate. Shattered glass crunched beneath Adrian's boots as he made his way through the ruin, the air thick with the stench of rotting food. The fetid odor was a gut-wrenching reminder of the life that once thrived here, now reduced to fragments of memory. His gloved hand clutched a worn canvas bag, hastily filling it with cans of beans, dry crackers, vestiges of normality. Yet, amidst the remnants of the old world, he stumbled upon something precious, a bar of chocolate. His heart tightened at the sight, a bittersweet memory of a time when such trivialities brought joy. Retracing his path through the desolate cityscape, Adrian returned to the fortress of his lab. His hands trembled as he secured the bolt, the cold, metallic taste of fear still fresh in his mouth. Outside, the city groaned under the weight of its decay, the silence punctuated only by the distant, dreadful moan of the undead. Back in the lab, the harsh fluorescent light washed over his workspace, illuminating the grotesque tableau of his daily trials. The zombie hand from yesterday laid still, a morbid monument to his ongoing experiments. With a sigh, he picked up his instruments, his hands steady with grim determination. Each incision, each sample was a step towards understanding, a step towards a cure. Yet, each failed experiment only served to echo the monstrous reality outside his window, the world forever changed by the Z-virus. As the day waned, the lonely silence of the lab pressed on Adrian. His only solace, the grimy pages of his journal filled with jargon-laden observations, formulas, and the occasional ink smudge. Every line was a testament to his struggle, his unwavering resolve to reclaim humanity from the jaws of oblivion. Yet, underneath his rigorous notes, the scientist's handwriting revealed the hidden burden of his loneliness, the invisible weight of his monumental task. Nightfall descended on the city, cloaking the harsh reality under its Inkai shroud. Adrian slumped into his makeshift cot, the events of the day catching up with him. His mind was haunted by ghostly memories, echoes of laughter, whispers of love, all swallowed by the horrifying moans of the undead. His eyes traced the cold, concrete walls of his shelter, his prison, his sanctuary. Sleep claimed him, but it was fitful, haunted by nightmares that were reflections of his waking life. And so, the crucible of survival claimed another day, the struggle continuing amidst the relentless march of the undead. Each sunrise a grim reminder of the world that was, and the world that now is. A fresh dawn bled into the derelict cityscape, casting long, haggard shadows that danced with the bare skeletons of the once grand structures. Dr. Adrian Holloway, shouldering the weight of his solitary existence, stepped into the chilling embrace of the morning, ready for another day in the crucible of survival. He stumbled upon her in the shattered remains of a bookstore, cornered by a trio of the shambling undead. The desperation in her eyes was an all-too-familiar sight. Her hair, matted with sweat and grime, framed a face too young to bear the burdens of this monstrous world. Adrian acted without thought. The rusted pipe in his hand was a grim reaper, harvesting the grotesque parody of life that these creatures clung to. Each swing was a symphony of survival, a grisly dance choreographed in the name of life. He rescued the woman, Lara, a beacon of life in the heart of the desolate city. She was grateful, yet her eyes held the cold edge of fear. It was not the monsters outside that scared her, but the dread of the bite she bore on her arm, a stark omen of the gruesome transformation to come. The lab, once a sanctuary of solitude, was now invaded by the chilling specter of mortality. Adrian could smell the metallic taint of her blood, see the waxy pallor of her skin. It was a haunting tableau of the merciless path the Z-virus carved through its victims. Faced with the moral quandary of Lara's imminent transformation, Adrian was torn between the scientist and the man. The scientist saw an opportunity, a living subject to study, to dissect the progress of the virus. The man saw a frightened girl, her life force dwindling with each labored breath, her terror reflecting in her glassy eyes. As Lara lay trembling on the sterile cot, Adrian steeled himself for the gruesome experiment he was about to conduct. He was no stranger to the macabre, but the weight of his decision bore heavily upon him. It was a sacrifice on the altar of hope, a price to pay for a potential cure. The metallic taste of fear permeated the lab as Adrian sterilized his tools. The scalpel gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light, a cruel reminder of the path he had chosen. With each passing second, Lara's breath grew shallower, her life ebbing away in the quietude of the lab. His hands, steady with grim resolve, began the dreadful dance of dissection. The scalpel dove beneath the skin, tracing the invisible tendrils of the virus. Adrian observed the corruption in her cells, scribbled hasty notes with blood-stained hands. The price of knowledge was steep, its toll etched into every line of his weathered face. As Lara's life faded, her frail form surrendering to the cruel dance of the Z-virus, Adrian continued his desperate study. The grim silence of the lab swallowed her final breath, a hollow echo in the sterile confines. The first living subject of his study was gone, her sacrifice indelibly etched in the annals of Adrian's fight against the undead plague. That night, the lab seemed colder, the shadows deeper. Adrian was once again alone, his company the chilling reminders of the day's sacrifice. Outside, the undead roamed aimlessly, oblivious to the twisted ballet of life and death that unfolded in the heart of their desolate world. This was the new normal, a world where sacrifices were made in the name of survival, where the line between monster and savior blurred under the harsh reality of existence. Under the pallid dawn that swept over the decaying cityscape, Dr. Adrian Holloway found himself grappling with the silence. The lab, usually a sanctuary of resolute determination, echoed with the hollow reminder of Lara's demise. Her ghost seemed to hover in the sterile confines, casting a chill that seeped into Adrian's bones. In the empty quiet, memories snaked their way into Adrian's mind, uninvited guests that gnawed at his solitude. He thought of his past, of his time at the university, awash in the halcyon days of discovery and innovation. He remembered the thrill of unraveling the secrets of life, the joy of stepping into uncharted territories of knowledge. His eyes drifted to the faded photograph pinned to the wall, the edges frayed with time. It was a snapshot of another life, a time when his world revolved around his wife's soft laughter and his son's gleeful chatter. A pang of longing gripped him, a melancholy yearning for the world that was no more. A cruel reminder of his present reality was Lara's lifeless body, now laid to rest outside the lab. The grim ritual was carried out in silence, the grave a crude testament to the monstrous world they inhabited. Adrian's heart weighed heavy with guilt, the price of his pursuit for a cure. His lab, once a symbol of hope, now seemed to mirror his deteriorating mental health. The tools of his trade, once wielded with determination, now served as a grim reminder of the extent he was willing to go in his quest for salvation. Each vial, each petri dish, echoed with the chilling resonance of his isolation. Dinner was a tin of cold beans, the bland taste a stark contrast to the flavorful memories of home-cooked meals. Each bite was a struggle, his appetite waning under the strain of his solitary existence. He missed the simple pleasures of a shared meal, the warmth of love that seasoned every dish. The rest of the day passed in a blur, a symphony of disheartening monotony. The radio hummed its static lullaby, his unanswered calls for survivors a testament to his relentless hope. The silent response seemed to further emphasize his isolation, painting a grim portrait of a world reduced to echoes. Nightfall descended upon the city, a cold blanket that covered the scars of decay and desolation. As Adrian retired to his cot, his body heavy with exhaustion, his mind was plagued with the haunting memories of his actions. He was a man torn between the morals of the past and the necessities of the present. As the night deepened, Adrian found himself staring into the abyss of his predicament. His thoughts echoed with questions that seemed to have no answers. Was he still the man who had vowed to protect and heal, or had he become the monster he feared, a grotesque reflection of the undead that prowled outside his lab? In the silence of the desolate world, Adrian wrestled with the haunting apparitions of his actions. His journey into the morrow was a path lit by the solitary flame of hope, a beacon in the chilling darkness of his existence. The requiem of the lost played on, a grim melody etched into the heart of the lonely survivor. In the chilling embrace of dawn, an unfamiliar sound pierced the air, shattering the grim serenity of the dead city. The roar of an engine, a relic of a time before the virus, rumbled through the streets, bringing with it the sweet melody of survival. Dr. Adrian Holloway, hunched over his dimly lit desk, jerked upright, his heart thundering against his ribs. The sound drew closer, and soon the silhouette of an armored truck rumbled into view, bathed in the gray light of the morning. With bated breath, Adrian watched as the vehicle skidded to a halt near the lab, dust billowing around it. The sight was as alien as it was exhilarating. He was no longer alone. Emerging from the truck were a ragtag band of survivors, 5 in total, their faces etched with relief and weariness. Their leader, a burly man with a grizzled beard and scarred face, introduced himself as John. The others, 2 men and 2 women, were an amalgamation of fear and hope, their eyes wide at the sight of another living human. Adrian was hesitant, but the potential of new test subjects was too promising to ignore. He offered them shelter, marking the beginning of an uncertain chapter in their shared struggle. The lab, a place that had only known isolation and gruesome sacrifices, was suddenly teeming with life, the silence replaced with whispers of hope. Their arrival breathed new life into Adrian's desolate existence. He found himself partaking in shared meals, his taste buds awakened by the surprising variety of flavors. The laughter and chatter, though tinged with sorrow and fear, were a balm to his heart and soul. Yet, despite the comfort of companionship, Adrian couldn't ignore the lurking dread that tainted this newfound camaraderie. Each cough, each wince of pain, each unusual flush of the skin was a grim reminder of their collective enemy, the Z-virus. As the group began to settle in, Adrian assumed a reluctant leadership role. He offered them hope, spinning tales of a cure on the horizon. His words ignited a spark in their eyes, a will to fight, to survive. Yet, the guilt of his intentions weighed heavily upon him. The impending experiments on these unsuspecting souls cast a long shadow over the illusion of safety. Their evenings were spent huddled around the crackling radio, their hearts buoyed by the hopeful strains of static. Adrian would send out calls into the vast, lifeless expanse, each unanswered echo serving as a grim reminder of their solitary struggle against the undead. The arrival of the group changed the dynamics of Adrian's survival. The lab was no longer just a sanctuary for a lone scientist, but a haven for a group of survivors clinging onto the thread of hope. This change, however welcome, set the stage for the looming horror that would redefine their understanding of survival and sacrifice. With the arrival of the survivors, the derelict lab took on a semblance of a home. The stark walls were softened by shared stories and echoing laughter, each a fleeting testament to their will to live. Dr. Adrian Holloway, now the unlikely shepherd of this ragtag flock, found himself torn between the allure of companionship and the stark realities of survival. In the quiet mornings, while his newfound family still slumbered, Adrian examined the samples he'd secretly taken. Under the microscope, the crimson dance of infected blood cells served as a grim reminder of his pursuit. Each observation, each data point, was a piece in the grotesque puzzle of the Z-virus. The guilt of his silent study gnawed at him, yet the end always seemed to justify the means. He noticed changes in one of them, Tom, a wiry man with a sharp wit. A subtle pallor, frequent bouts of coughing, a reluctance to eat, all the ominous signs of an infection. Adrian was torn, his role as the leader at odds with his cold, clinical perspective. Yet, the looming prospect of a living subject pushed aside any lingering doubts. The rest of the day was a mask of normalcy. Adrian shared meals with the group, joined their futile attempts at radio communication, and lent an ear to their tales of horror and survival. His gaze often rested on Tom, the unwitting subject of his impending experiment, the guilt of his intent casting a grim shadow on their camaraderie. As night fell, Adrian found himself battling a storm of emotions. He wrestled with the ethics of his decision, his dreams plagued with monstrous transformations and accusations of betrayal. Each morning greeted him with red-rimmed eyes and a heart heavy with the weight of his secret. The day the transformation gripped Tom was one of heart-rending sorrow and grim anticipation. Tom's eyes were dull, his skin pale, his breath ragged. The group was a tableau of despair, their sanctuary invaded by the monster they feared most. Yet, for Adrian, it was a moment of truth, the culmination of his gruesome experiments. Under the pretense of easing Tom's suffering, Adrian commenced his most controversial experiment yet. The group watched, their eyes filled with fear and hope, oblivious to the grisly study being conducted right before them. As Tom convulsed under the severity of the virus, Adrian worked with grim determination, taking samples, making notes, his heart torn between the savior they saw and the monster he was becoming. When Tom drew his final breath, a chilling silence swept over the lab. It was the shared grief of lost kin, the stark reminder of their grim reality. Yet, for Adrian, it was a landmark in his solitary crusade against the Z-virus. His guilt was a bitter pill, a necessary evil in the face of their collective enemy. Life in the lab fell into a heavy silence, each survivor grappling with their loss. Adrian, bearing the added weight of his gruesome actions, found himself spiraling into a chasm of guilt and fear. The blurred lines of his roles, the reluctant shepherd and the desperate scientist, were beginning to weave a monstrous tapestry in his fight against the undead plague. The echoes of Tom's departure lingered in the lab, casting long shadows of sorrow and suspicion. Dr. Adrian Holloway, burdened by his grim secret, felt the weight of guilt pressing down on him. Yet, his desperation for a cure urged him on, further into the abyss of his monstrous transformation. His days were steeped in a haunting duality. By day, he was the comforting presence, the reassuring voice, and the compassionate leader. He shared meals with the survivors, his laughter ringing out in a semblance of normalcy. But when night fell and the survivors retreated into their dreams, the scientist awoke. His lab, a realm of cold metal and sterile scents, played host to his relentless experiments, each one more disturbing than the last. The second subject was Marion, a woman of stoic grace. Her coughs, masked by polite smiles, did not go unnoticed by Adrian. The symptoms of the Z-virus were clear to him, and despite the weight of his guilt, he knew she was the next piece in his gruesome puzzle. The group was still mourning Tom, their hearts heavy and their spirits low. Adrian seized this moment to conduct his experiments, his intentions concealed under the cloak of empathy and compassion. Marion, feverish and weak, unwittingly became a test subject for his relentless pursuit of a cure. His nights were filled with the chilling dance of life and death. The sterile glow of his lab became a grim stage where he performed his twisted ballet, the virus, and he locked in a deadly dance of wits. His hands, now steady with grim resolve, moved with a disturbingly mechanical rhythm. The air, tainted with the metallic scent of blood and the stench of decay, was a grim testament to his actions. Yet, beneath the cold determination, Adrian was crumbling. His reflection, once a picture of grim resolve, now stared back at him with haunted eyes. Each wrinkle, each gray strand, bore the weight of his monstrous deeds. The man he saw was no longer the hopeful scientist from a forgotten past, but a reflection of the desolate world outside his lab. As Marion's life waned, the group rallied around her, their hearts heavy with impending loss. Yet, none suspected the grueling experiment that unfolded under their very eyes, the chilling dance of science and survival that cost Marion her life. With Marion's passing, the group was plunged into despair. The lab, their sanctuary, was now tainted with the specter of death. Adrian, bearing the weight of his monstrous deeds, found himself standing at the precipice of his humanity, his reflection mirroring the undead that roamed outside. His experiments, now a bloody trial of his ethics and survival, were leading him further into the abyss. The man he was and the man he was becoming were blurring into a grim silhouette of survival. His fight against the Z-virus was pushing him closer to the edge, his humanity hanging by a thin thread over the gaping maw of monstrosity. A pall of grief hung over the lab, heavy and suffocating, in the wake of Marion's passing. The survivors moved like specters through their haven, their hearts heavy with loss and fear. Dr. Adrian Holloway, weighed down by guilt and the secret of his horrific experiments, could only watch as the facade of safety crumbled. The discovery came like a storm, sudden and devastating. John, the burly man who had assumed the role of protector, stumbled upon Adrian's notes. His eyes widened with every word, horror etching itself onto his hardened face. He confronted Adrian, his voice thunderous in the grim silence of the lab. Accusations filled the air, each word a dagger plunged into the fragile veil of trust that had bound the survivors together. The others looked on, their faces paling as the grim reality of Adrian's monstrous experiments was unveiled. They were not merely survivors, but unwilling test subjects in a macabre dance of science and survival. Chaos erupted within the confines of the lab, a mirror of the pandemonium outside. The survivors, betrayed and enraged, turned on Adrian. Their sanctuary was tainted, the shepherd revealed as a wolf. Anger, a fiery beacon in the heart of their despair, fueled their revolt. In the ensuing struggle, the makeshift barricades were compromised. The monstrous undead, ever drawn to the scent of living flesh, swarmed towards the lab. The grim outside world invaded their sanctuary, the nightmare they had kept at bay unleashed in their midst. The lab, once a beacon of order amidst the chaos, was transformed into a battleground. Adrian, the man they had trusted, was now their enemy. The survivors fought not only against the invading undead, but against the betrayal that had cut deeper than any zombie's bite. Amongst the turmoil, an infected subject Adrian had kept for study was set free. The creature, once a human, now a monstrous reflection of the virus, lunged at Adrian. He grappled with it, his arms straining against the unnatural strength of the creature. In the struggle, he felt a sharp sting, the creature's rotten teeth sinking into his arm. As the revolt raged, the lab was plunged into ruin. The cold, sterile light flickered and died, plunging the room into an ominous darkness. The echoes of their struggle were swallowed by the moans of the undead, a chilling symphony of their nightmare. When dawn broke, the revolt had run its course. The survivors had fled, their trust shattered, their sanctuary ruined. The undead were vanquished, their grotesque bodies littering the floor of the lab. Adrian was left alone in the grim aftermath, his arm throbbing with a biting pain, his heart heavy with guilt. The rebellion had revealed his monstrous deeds, the lab was in ruins, and he was once again alone in his battle against the Z-virus. In the cold light of dawn, the ruin of the lab stood in grim testimony to the night's rebellion. The scattered remnants of his work, the broken barricades, and the decaying bodies of the undead painted a chilling portrait of betrayal and devastation. Dr. Adrian Holloway, nursing a bite from one of his own grotesque subjects, was once again thrust into the throes of isolation. The pain radiating from his wound was a constant reminder of the turn of events. Each throb was an echo of his monstrous deeds, of the trust he had broken, of the revolt that had shattered his facade. The Z-virus was in his veins now, a ticking time bomb that threatened to erase his humanity. Despite the grim prognosis, Adrian clung to his scientist persona. He cleaned and dressed his wound, his mind a whirlwind of hypotheses and potential antidotes. Even on the precipice of his transformation, his unyielding resolve did not waver. The silence of the lab was oppressive, a stark contrast to the chaos of the revolt. His radio, now a broken relic, lay silent, adding to the profound loneliness that blanketed him. His calls for survivors, once a beacon of hope, were now a haunting reminder of his solitary battle. As the day wore on, he felt the initial symptoms of the virus creep in. A cold sweat coated his skin, his body trembled uncontrollably, and an unquenchable thirst gripped him. Despite the physical torment, he forced himself to document each symptom, his notes scrawled in a shaky hand. The sight of his abandoned lab, stripped of its sanctity and safety, was a painful reminder of his deceit. The blood-stained floor, the upturned furniture, and the vacant cots were testament to the lives he had manipulated in his blind pursuit of a cure. In the punishing grip of fever, Adrian spent the day and night wrestling with his symptoms and guilt. His mind was a battlefield of memories and regrets, each more painful than the last. He found no solace in sleep, his dreams a horrifying playground of monstrous transformations and echoing accusations. He woke up several times, his body racked with chills, the taste of his impending transformation bitter on his tongue. His lab, once a symbol of hope, was now a prison, the walls closing in on him with every labored breath. The 9th day marked a grim chapter in his struggle against the Z-virus. Alone, betrayed, and on the brink of becoming the monster he had vowed to eliminate, Adrian found himself teetering on the edge of despair. His research, his sacrifices, and his monstrous deeds echoed in the oppressive silence, a chilling reminder of the man he had become. The morning sun cast long shadows over the ruins of the lab, its warm rays a stark contrast to the chilling reality within. Dr. Adrian Holloway, his body succumbing to the relentless march of the Z-virus, was a ghost of his former self. His skin had taken on a sickly pallor, his breath was ragged, and his once bright eyes had dimmed. Despite the gnawing pain and creeping despair, he refused to surrender to the virus. He hauled himself to his workbench, his hands trembling as they rifled through the scattered notes and discarded samples. His determination was a final, defiant roar against the approaching darkness. Fueled by desperation, Adrian started synthesizing an experimental antidote. The lab was filled with the clinking of glass and the hum of machinery, a last-ditch symphony against the silence of his isolation. Each movement was labored, the fight against the transformation consuming his strength. Hours turned into a haze of pain and determination. His body screamed in protest, his vision swam, yet he persisted. The stakes were clear. It was a race against his own body, against the monstrous creature he was on the verge of becoming. As the final components of the antidote came together, a wave of weakness washed over him. He could feel the transformation nearing completion, his humanity hanging by a thin thread. With one last surge of willpower, he administered the antidote. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Pain flared through his body like wildfire, searing every nerve, every cell. His vision dimmed, his strength ebbed, and for a moment, he teetered on the brink of oblivion. Against all odds, he woke. His body was soaked in sweat, his breath ragged, but his senses were his own. The transformation had halted, the monstrous tide receded. The grim grip of the Z-virus had been loosened, his humanity snatched back from the jaws of the beast. Outside, the city lay silent, the ruins a stark reminder of the world that once was. The undead roamed aimlessly, their grotesque forms a testament to the virus's monstrous reign. Yet within the confines of the ruined lab, a beacon of hope flickered. His cure, though still experimental, was a step towards reclaiming their lost world. The cost had been immense, the sacrifices unbearable, but the outcome held promise. Alone in his victory, Adrian Holloway, the scientist, the savior, the monster, held in his hands the potential to turn the tide against the undead plague. As the sun set on the desolate city, a sense of hope stirred within the ruins of the lab. His fight was far from over, the path to salvation strewn with unimaginable horrors, but the glimmer of a cure rekindled his resolve. His journey into the morrow was a testament to human spirit and resilience, a solitary stand against the monstrous apocalypse. And there you have it, dear listeners, another grotesque waltz in the ballroom of horror has reached its chilling conclusion. Our journey through the desolate world of the undead has left us on the precipice of our fears, peering into the abyss of the unknown. As we draw the curtain on this narrative, we leave behind the grim reality of the lab and its lone occupant, but we carry with us the echoes of his monstrous transformation. Remember, in the silence of your rooms, the specters of our tale continue to lurk, reminding us of the delicate line between humanity and monstrosity. Until we meet again in the next episode of our scary stories, keep the lights on and listen to the whispers of the dark. Good night and sweet dreams. This is our Scary Stories signing off for tonight.